Global War Archives, the wars that shaped humanity. War is as old as humanity itself. From the moment early societies began competing for land, resources, and power, conflict became a defining force of human history. Kingdoms rose through conquest, empires expanded through violence, and civilizations collapsed under the weight of endless war. In every era, from the ancient world to the modern age, war has rewritten borders, reshaped cultures, and altered the destiny of billions. Welcome to Global War Archives, a journey through time where we uncover the greatest conflicts ever fought and the stories hidden behind the smoke of battle. Long before written history, tribes clashed with stone weapons over hunting grounds and survival. These early wars were not fought for ideology or nationalism, but for existence itself. Archaeological evidence reveals fortified settlements, mass graves, and weapons designed specifically to kill other humans. Even in humanity's earliest chapters, war was not an accident. It was a response to fear, scarcity, and ambition. As societies grew more complex, so too did the nature of warfare. The rise of ancient civilizations marked a turning point. In Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, war became organized and institutionalized. City-states like Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon built armies, crafted bronze weapons, and recorded victories on stone tablets. Kings ruled not only as administrators but as warriors, believed to be chosen by the gods to conquer their enemies. War became sacred, political, and strategic. Victory meant survival, defeat meant slavery or annihilation. In ancient Egypt, war served a different purpose. Protected by deserts and seas, Egypt rarely fought for survival, but rather for dominance and prestige. Pharaohs led campaigns into Nubia and the Levant, carving their triumphs on temple walls. These wars were portrayed not as brutal struggles, but as divine acts where order triumphed over chaos. Yet behind the art and symbolism were real soldiers, real bloodshed, and real suffering that sustained an empire for thousands of years. Meanwhile, in Asia, powerful states emerged with military philosophies that still influence warfare today. In ancient China, constant warfare between rival kingdoms led to innovations in strategy, discipline, and leadership. The writings of Sun Tzu, particularly The Art of War, emphasized intelligence, deception, and psychological dominance over brute force. War was no longer just about strength, it was about the mind. These ideas would echo across centuries, shaping generals far beyond China's borders. The ancient world also witnessed wars of empire. Assyria perfected terror as a weapon, using fear to control vast territories. Persia built one of the largest empires the world had ever seen through a combination of military power and political tolerance. Greece, divided into independent city-states, produced some of history's most legendary conflicts. The Persian Wars united rival Greeks against a common enemy, while the Peloponnesian War destroyed Greek unity from within, proving that the greatest threats often come from inside. No ancient empire left a deeper military legacy than Rome. Roman warfare was disciplined, systematic, and relentless. Legions marched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, crushing resistance and building roads that still exist today. War was Rome's engine of expansion, wealth, and identity. Yet it was also Rome's downfall. Endless wars drained resources, empowered ambitious generals, and weakened the republic, paving the way for dictatorship and eventual collapse. As the ancient world faded, a new era of warfare emerged. The Middle Ages transformed war into a struggle defined by faith, feudal loyalty, and fortifications. Castles rose across Europe, knights fought in armor, and battles were shaped by social hierarchy as much as strategy. Warfare became slower but no less deadly. Peasants suffered the most, caught between rival lords whose wars were fought for power rather than justice. Religion became one of the most powerful motivators for war. The Crusades launched waves of conflict between Christian and Muslim powers, leaving centuries of bloodshed and mistrust in their wake. Though often framed as holy wars, these conflicts were driven as much by politics, wealth, and ambition as by belief. Entire populations were displaced or destroyed, and the scars of these wars still influence global relations today. In Africa, great kingdoms and empires fought wars that are often overlooked by mainstream history. From the empires of Mali and Songhai to the Christian kingdoms of Ethiopia, warfare shaped trade routes, religious identity, and political survival. African wars were not isolated, they were deeply connected to global systems through commerce, diplomacy, and later colonization. The invention of gunpowder revolutionized warfare forever. Cannons shattered castle walls, muskets replaced swords, and battles became louder, deadlier, and more chaotic. The balance of power shifted from knights to armies, from nobles to nations. States that adapted survived, those that did not were conquered. War was no longer seasonal or limited, it became total. The early modern period saw wars of kings and dynasties, but also the birth of nationalism. Conflicts like the 30 Years' War devastated Europe, killing millions and proving that war could destroy entire societies, not just armies. Civilians were no longer bystanders, they were targets, victims, and survivors of endless violence. The Age of Empire spread war across the globe. European powers fought not only each other, but conquered vast regions in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Indigenous populations faced extermination, forced labor, and cultural destruction. These wars were justified as progress or civilization, but their true cost was measured in lost lives and stolen futures. The global balance of power was built on blood. By the 20th century, war had reached an unprecedented scale. World War I shattered the illusion that industrial progress would bring peace. Trenches stretched across Europe, machine guns mowed down soldiers by the millions, and chemical weapons introduced horrors never before imagined. It was a war of ideologies as much as armies, a struggle that redefined morality, justice, and power on a global scale. When it ended, the world was divided, traumatized, and permanently changed. The Cold War replaced open battlefields with proxy wars, espionage, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. Conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Africa, and the Middle East became battlegrounds for superpowers seeking influence without direct confrontation. War was no longer just fought with weapons, but with propaganda, economics, and fear. In the modern era, warfare continues to evolve. Technology has introduced drones, cyber warfare, and artificial intelligence. Battles are fought not only on land, sea, and air, but in cyberspace and information networks. Yet despite all the advancements, the human cost remains the same. Civilians still suffer, soldiers still die, and nations still bear the scars long after the fighting ends. Throughout history, war has been a paradox. It has driven innovation while destroying civilizations. It has united people while tearing humanity apart. Every conflict leaves behind stories of heroism and cruelty, sacrifice and survival. These stories are not just about the past, they shape our present and influence our future. At Global War Archives, we do not glorify war. We document it, we analyze it, we remember it, because understanding war is essential to understanding humanity itself. The lessons written in blood must not be forgotten, or they will be repeated.
As the medieval world matured, warfare became increasingly structured, but no less brutal. Feudal systems tied soldiers to land and loyalty, binding knights to lords and lords to kings. Battles were often small in scale compared to later wars, yet their consequences were immense. A single defeat could erase a noble family, collapse a kingdom, or plunge entire regions into decades of instability. Warfare was no longer only about conquest, it was about legitimacy, inheritance, and divine approval. Across Europe, the clash between crowns and claims led to prolonged struggles, such as the Hundred Years' War. This conflict between England and France lasted over a century, not as one continuous battle, but as series of campaigns, truces, betrayals, and renewals of violence.
But as a series of campaigns, truces, betrayals, and renewals of violence, it marked the slow death of medieval warfare. Knights in shining armor were cut down by longbows and early firearms, proving that tradition could not withstand innovation. Peasant soldiers armed with bows reshaped the battlefield, signaling a future where social class mattered less than military effectiveness. At the same time, powerful Islamic empires were reshaping warfare across the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe. The Ottoman Empire, rising from Anatolia, mastered gunpowder warfare with terrifying efficiency. Cannons breached the ancient walls of Constantinople in 1453, ending the Byzantine Empire and announcing a new age of war. This single event sent shockwaves through Europe and Asia, demonstrating that no empire, no matter how ancient, was immune to military evolution. In Asia, warfare followed its own complex paths. In Japan, centuries of civil war forged the samurai class, warriors bound by honor, discipline, and loyalty. Battles between rival daimyo shaped Japanese society, culture, and governance. Yet even here, tradition eventually gave way to technology. Firearms, introduced by foreign traders, transformed Japanese warfare almost overnight, proving once again that adaptation was the key to survival. In South Asia, empires rose and fell through conquest and resistance. The Mughal Empire combined military strength with administrative genius, ruling over millions through both force and diplomacy. War was not constant chaos, it was carefully managed power. Fortified cities, massive armies, and advanced logistics allowed empires to maintain control over vast territories. Yet internal rebellion and external invasion always lurked beneath the surface. As global exploration expanded, war followed. European powers carried conflict across oceans, turning distant lands into battlegrounds. In the Americas, indigenous civilizations encountered warfare unlike anything they had known. Steel weapons, firearms, horses, and disease devastated entire populations. These were not wars between equals, they were wars of annihilation, justified by empire and greed. The consequences reshaped continents forever. Africa, too, became entangled in global warfare. Powerful African states resisted, adapted, and sometimes allied with foreign powers. Conflicts over trade routes, resources, and territory intensified as European ambitions grew. These wars were complex and strategic, not primitive as often portrayed. African leaders used diplomacy, military innovation, and knowledge of terrain to defend their sovereignty, sometimes successfully, sometimes at devastating cost. By the 17th and 18th centuries, warfare had become increasingly nationalized. Standing armies replaced feudal levies, uniforms replaced personal armor, and discipline replaced individual heroism. Battles were now fought in formations, governed by strict rules and commands. War became a science. Strategy, logistics, and supply lines mattered as much as courage. A general's mind could now decide the fate of nations. This transformation reached its peak during the Age of Revolution. The American Revolutionary War and the French Revolution changed not only politics, but the very nature of war. Soldiers were no longer just fighting for kings, they were fighting for ideas. Liberty, equality, and nationalism became weapons as powerful as cannons. Entire populations mobilized for war, blurring the line between civilian and soldier. Napoleon Bonaparte embodied this new era. His campaigns swept across Europe with unprecedented speed and scale. Napoleon proved that warfare could be both brilliant and catastrophic. His victories redrew maps, but his defeat demonstrated the limits of ambition. Millions died across Europe, and the continent was forever altered. War had become continental in scope and total in impact. The 19th century brought industrialization, and with it, industrial war. Railways moved armies faster than ever before. Factories produced weapons in unimaginable quantities. Rifles increased range and accuracy, turning battlefields into killing fields. The American Civil War foreshadowed the horrors to come: trenches, mass casualties, and total mobilization of society. It was a warning the world failed to heed. Colonial wars intensified as empires competed for dominance. These conflicts were brutal, asymmetrical, and devastating to local populations. Advanced weaponry crushed resistance, but resistance never disappeared. Rebellions, uprisings, and guerrilla warfare became tools of the oppressed. The seeds of future revolutions were planted in the blood of colonial battlefields. As the world entered the 20th century, tension hung heavy in the air. Alliances bound nations together in fragile networks of obligation. National pride, militarism, and imperial rivalry pushed Europe toward the brink. When war finally erupted in 1914, it spread like wildfire. What many believed would be a short, glorious conflict became a nightmare without end. World War I introduced a scale of destruction never before witnessed. Trenches carved across Europe trapped millions in muddy hellscapes. Machine guns, artillery, and poison gas erased entire generations. Commanders struggled to adapt to new technology, sending soldiers into hopeless assaults. Victory was measured in meters gained and lives lost. By the time the war ended, the world was exhausted, traumatized, and unstable. The aftermath of World War I sowed the seeds of the next catastrophe. Empires collapsed, borders were redrawn, and unresolved grievances festered. Economic hardship and political extremism flourished. Peace treaties promised stability but delivered resentment. War had ended on paper, but in reality, it had only paused. Between the wars, nations rearmed and ideologies hardened. Fascism, communism, and nationalism clashed in a battle for the future of humanity. Civil wars and regional conflicts became testing grounds for new weapons and tactics. The world stood on the edge of something far worse than before. When World War II erupted, it consumed the globe. This was not just a war of armies, it was a war of entire societies. Cities were bombed, civilians targeted, and genocide carried out with chilling efficiency. The Holocaust revealed the darkest depths of human cruelty, while total war erased any remaining illusion of moral boundaries. Battles raged across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the oceans. The scale was unimaginable. Millions fought, tens of millions died. Science became a weapon, culminating in the atomic bomb. When nuclear fire fell from the sky, humanity crossed a threshold from which there was no return. War had gained the power to end civilization itself. The end of World War II did not bring peace, it brought division. The world split into rival camps, locked in ideological conflict. The Cold War replaced direct confrontation with proxy wars, espionage, and constant nuclear threat. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and countless other conflicts claimed millions of lives under the shadow of superpower rivalry. Decolonization sparked new wars as former colonies fought for independence and identity. These conflicts were brutal, chaotic, and deeply personal. Nations born from war struggled to escape its legacy. Borders drawn by outsiders ignited endless disputes. The echoes of colonial warfare still resonate today. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, warfare transformed again. Terrorism, insurgency, and asymmetric warfare replaced traditional battles. Technology gave powerful nations unmatched surveillance and precision, yet could not eliminate resistance. War became decentralized, unpredictable, and endless. Today, war is fought in new domains. Cyber attacks cripple infrastructure. Information warfare manipulates truth itself. Drones strike from the sky without warning. Artificial intelligence begins to make decisions once reserved for humans. Yet despite all this, the fundamental nature of war remains unchanged. It is still about power, fear, and control. At Global War Archives, we examine these conflicts not to glorify them, but to understand them. Because every war leaves behind lessons written in blood. Forgetting those lessons guarantees repetition. And history has shown us one undeniable truth. When humanity forgets the past, war is always waiting.